Good morning. I've got 30 quick points I want to share with you this morning. I'm just kidding. Don't want to make you write that much. Hello, my name is Bryson Carroll. I am an assistant, works with Adventures in Missions. I went to AIM over 10 years ago, and I can still remember some of the impacts that my assistants had in my life. I can remember getting up here for my first time for chapel, being able to come and speak about being an instrument in the hands of God. I still remember that 10 years later, probably because I was shaken to my core with fear and anxiety. But I remember all of these things about that time. Many of the instructors may remember a very long-haired, injury-ridden person that ran around this area even before that. I've been around this area for a while, and people continue to ask us, why are we continuing to work with AIM? Why do we stay here? What's the goal? What's the purpose? And I really believe that one of the best things we get to do as assistants is we get to invest in young people. So I want to share some things with you this morning. First, I want to tell you a little bit about what it is to be an assistant. What do we do? And then I want to tell you two things that I think are crucial for why people become assistants to begin with, why people mentor. And that is that people want and need mentors, and secondly, because ministry is difficult. So to begin with, you may have heard about assistants that we do area church. We lead groups on Sundays, take Aimers out to different areas around Lubbock, to churches there that we work with directly. We spend the day with them out there. We allow the Aimers to get their feet wet to understand what it means to be involved in a congregation on Sundays. Things like that. We direct small groups, helping Aimers figure out what that looks like. How do I lead a small group? How do I do these things? We help Aimers prepare if they're going to speak, if they're going to teach a Bible lesson, if they're going to speak in chapel, to make sure that they do a great job there. We help them with academics, with newsletters, with crises, right, that may come up within their roommates, within teammates, what have you. There's a lot of things that we do. But to me, all of that is secondary, because I think the biggest thing that assistants do is that they invest in young people. And we may call this a number of different things. We may talk about it as mentoring, coaching, discipling. But what it really boils down to for me is intentional human connection. Intentional human connection. I think that's what really drives people to be here to be assistants, because that's what they experienced when they were here in AIM, is that someone took the time to invest in them, to connect with them. Not just something that would have happened naturally because they were friends, they were of the same age, but they made an intentional decision to say, I'm going to connect to this person, I'm going to invest in this person because it's worth it. They're worth it, and it's a worthwhile endeavor. And this is as relevant of a thing as anything else that we do. It's been relevant for over 2,000 years now. I would argue that it's been relevant since the dawn of creation. We get very worked up about making sure that our preaching is very dynamic, that our Bible studies are very engaging, that we make sure that our buildings look nice, that we've got all of these fancy technological devices so that people will come. And don't get me wrong, all of those things are good. But what we don't pay attention to enough, I think, is the basic thing that makes us humans, and that's connection, relationship, interaction with each other. And that is a powerful, powerful tool, not just in understanding who we are as human beings, but it's a powerful, powerful tool in ministry. If you look at the life of Jesus, yes, he preaches. He gives wonderful sermons. He speaks truth into people's lives when they are far, far away from God. But one of the best things and the most frequent things he does is he makes personal connection. He makes intentional connections with people. We may think about the woman at the well, who he had no right to be talking to, and if you want to look at it from a cultural viewpoint. We may look at a dozen of other people. Nicodemus, as he's coming at night, trying to figure out who Jesus is. Zacchaeus, a despised man who Jesus connects with. All of these different people that we see from the gospel, Jesus made an intentional human connection with that person. And I'm convinced that this is paramount for us in ministry. It really is. That if we want our preaching to be successful, if we want our teaching to be successful, if we want our churches to be alive and on fire, yes, God is going to help us do that. He's going to pour His Spirit out on us and on the people that want to follow Him. But if we want to set a foundation, we've got to follow what Jesus did as well, and that's making human connection with other people. So I'm going to tell you why we need to do this. Two big things that I think are crucial for why we need to do this. The first is people, and I would say especially young people, they not only need a mentor, they want a mentor. Many times we assume that people aren't interested. This may especially be true with young people. We may think, well, they're too distracted by such and such going on in their life, maybe pop culture, maybe trying to pursue an education. Maybe they just don't really care that much about religion. And I would say that is unequivocally false. That is an impression that we have, but really what's happening there is that young people, for the most part, they're not going to open up, they're not going to want to know about these things until they realize that someone truly cares about them, that someone is making an intentional connection to them that says, yes, I believe in God, yes, I want to share these things with you, but I want to connect with you as a human being, as a person, because you are a person, and because it's worth it. That is such a huge, huge thing, and people, especially young people, are desperate for that. I grew up here at Sunset, as I mentioned earlier a little bit. I went through all of the different events that Sunset offered. My mom works up here in the building, so I practically grew up here. I was at every single retreat, every single devotional, every single activity that we had. I was doing everything, and on the outside, it may have looked like I was a good young Christian, when in reality, that could not have been further from the truth. I had absolutely no interest in Christianity whatsoever. I was incredibly depressed by the existential crisis of life. Do I go to school to make money? Is that the point? If I make all this money, I die anyway. What's the point, right? I was so frustrated and upset with life, and really I was just going through the motions. And it wasn't until I think, very much God-directed event that happened at one of our retreats. I ejected a disc that one of our teachers was going to be using, and he kind of flew off the handle at me, and I was not prepared for that, and started getting very emotional and crying. He apologized afterwards, and I think kind of out of that, he saw, you know, this young man seems to be a little bit fragile. Maybe I can, reach out to him a little bit. That man was Bill Tracy. A couple weeks later, I know it may be difficult for us to imagine Bill flying off the handle. And he apologized, and it wasn't an issue at all. And I understand that getting a video to a very certain spot and then losing that is incredibly frustrating. But a few weeks after that retreat, he reached out to me and he said, Bryson, what would you think about us getting together and reading the Bible? And I gave the typical answer, well, I don't know, I'm busy, school's rough. He's like, I really want you to think about it. I would really like to do this. I'd really like to read with you. And I thought, wow, no one's ever said that to me, especially someone that's more than 2 or 3 years older than me. Maybe I'll give this a shot. And we opened up Scripture, and I looked through it, and for the first time I realized this book that I've been, carrying around with me everywhere, never opening, this has some incredible stuff to it. This makes life make sense. I remember reading through Ecclesiastes and realizing, yes, this is the answer, right? If all of these things are just extemporary or just really fleeting in the reality, in the big scheme of things, then yes, the biggest thing is to worship God, is to follow God, is to serve God with everything that I am. He invested in me. He made an intentional connection with me. There may have not have been another reason for us to connect outside of the reason that Bill decided to do it. He decided intentionally to say, there's going to be a connection between us because God has called me to something greater, because this young man deserves it, and because it's a worthwhile endeavor. We may read in Titus chapter 2, verse 1 through 8, about how Paul there instructs both the older women and the older men to invest in the younger men and the younger women, to teach them, to instruct them, to show them what it looks like to be a Christian. That's, again, as true as it was 2,000 years ago. It is as true today as it was then. Secondly, I believe mentoring is incredibly important and necessary because ministry is difficult. The youth experience a number of pressures both internally and externally. There may be times when you're going through ministry and you're putting your all in it. You feel like you couldn't be more connected to God, more on fire for God, and you're developing all of these things, you're reaching out to people, and nothing's happening. Your endeavors fall flat, and you get frustrated and you say, what am I doing wrong? Am I failing? What's happening? Or maybe there's external pressure. Maybe there's people that are angry with you. Maybe it's a culture. Maybe it's a community. Any number of different things that there's these pressures that weigh on you in ministry, and it is incredibly difficult. And we have got to dispel this idea that preachers and ministers are one-man bands, that they're just a performance out there by themselves, they're an island unto themselves. That cannot be, because if we act that way, we are doomed to fail. We need each other. We need each other desperately. We need each other to pour love and comfort into our lives when we are struggling, when we meet those hardships in ministry that says, I feel incredibly burnt out. The biggest thing I want to do is just quit my job, quit preaching, and walk away. Not just walk away from ministry, but possibly walk away from the church. And we don't like to hear that, but that is a reality of things that have happened and will continue to happen in our brotherhood because ministry is incredibly challenging. So we may call people to have greater faith. We may equip them with new methods and new tools and how to reach out. But what we have absolutely got to do is invest in them, is to connect to them, is to make an intentional connection with them that lasts, that endures. I remember spending my time in Lima, Peru with Paul Dow. And I remember it being an incredible challenge for me. The culture was difficult, the language was difficult, but more than anything else, I had to come face to face with who I was. I had to come face to face with my shortcomings. I had to come face to face with the failures that I had committed on the field and realize, look at all of these things I could have done, all of these regrets that I had, and it was crushing. It was crushing to me. There were many times that I just wanted to leave because I felt like I wasn't doing anything. I felt like I was wasting people's money that was supporting me. I felt like I wasn't there to do what I was called to do. It was crushing. And I remember so many times Paul would reach down and pick me up and say, you know what, you're doing a great job. Look at all of these things that you're involved in. Look at all of these things that you're doing. Realize that the seeds that you're planting, they may not bear fruit for a number of years well after you're gone here. Do not give up. Be faithful to what God has called you to because He is going to be faithful to you. And if it was not for that mentorship, if it was not for that connection, I don't know if I would have stayed. I don't know if I would have remained there. I remember coming back to be an assistant and experiencing reverse culture shock or trying to instruct aimers and help them and feeling like, what am I doing? I can't help these people. My field time was awful, or at least it was in my estimation to some extent. I can't teach them. I'm a failure. I can't do this. I've got too much going on. I can't do this like I need to. And I remember people like Brandon Price, Josh Tucker, again, being able to reach down and pick me up and say, no, you can do it. You can do it. Here's what you need to do. Here's the direction you need to go. Here's what this looks like. And they were able to comfort me, encourage me, and instruct me in the things that I needed to do in the way that I needed to go. I remember taking a position in Denver City. I'm still out there now as a part-time minister there. And I remember the preacher, as they were trying to let me know that I'd gotten a job, told me, we're going to take care of things. You do whatever you feel big enough to do. And that was such a freeing thing right from the get-go to say, to be given that freedom to say, you do what you feel like you're capable of doing, let us take care of the rest. I remember when things would happen at camp that were not appreciated by parents, and elders being able to step in and say, let me have a conversation with this person, I'll help it out. We'll get through it. Or being able to talk to them and say, man, I'm just really struggling with this person. I'm trying to connect, I'm trying to invest, but it just feels like I don't know what to do. And for them to be able to say, look, I've seen a difference from, when you first started having a relationship with that person until now, and here's the growth that I've seen. Keep on going. You can do it. People like Skip Rogers, people like Ted Jackson, people like Tom McElroy, people like Rodney Curtis. These are people that, without them, I would not be in ministry. I'm convinced of that because I'm not strong enough to do this on my own. I can't do it on my own. If it's just me, I'm looking at all my failures and things, and yes, I'm trying to hold on to God, but I need that support. I need it. And people stepped in and provided it. There was no benefit to them necessarily. They didn't get anything out of it, but they decided to make an intentional connection with me because I was worth it and because the endeavor was worth it. So why am I saying all of this? I'm convinced that this is exactly what we get to do as assistants. That we get to invest in young people, that we get to make those intentional connections that are going to last and that are going to have meaning and purpose in people's lives. It's not just for now when they're here these 8 months. It's well beyond that. It's when difficulties come on the field or difficulties come after they get home and they say, I don't know what to do. I feel like my church just doesn't get it. I've been on the mission field for the past year and a half and done all these amazing things and my church just doesn't get it. And I want to walk away. I am so burnt out. I'm so disillusioned. And for them to be able to reach out and for a mentor, a coach, someone to be able to pour out good things in their life and say, man, I know it's frustrating, but it's worth it. Don't allow yourself to get so discouraged that you walk away from your faith. We are in such desperate need of that, and it is so fundamental to everything that we're doing. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 11 and 12. Paul, we'll see how he's taken Timothy alongside him, taken him on all these journeys, placed him somewhere, and he writes letters to him. He makes an intentional connection to him. And he says this to Timothy, "But you, man of God, run from these things and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. Fight the good fight for the faith. Take hold of eternal life that you are called to and have made a good confession about in the presence of many witnesses." I have to believe that when Timothy read those words, he was totally refreshed. He was totally renewed. He saw such a man like Paul, a pillar in the church at that time and for all of time, to say these things to this young man who may have been struggling at the time. And Timothy says, you know what, I can do it. I can do it because Paul believes in me and ultimately because God believes in me. We need that. And that's exactly what I think we get to do as assistants. So I want to leave you with this. Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 and 21. 19 through 21 as Rex read just a second ago. It's this idea of storing up treasures, not on earth, but in heaven. And I want you to think about, what are those treasures going to be? In all the things that we're involved in, all the good things, what of those things are going to remain? Is our knowledge, is our experience, all of these things, are they going to remain? Not necessarily. The investments that we give, the teachings that we give can affect people for sure. But once the reality is known, all of those other things fade in the back. What is that treasure going to be? What can you store up for yourself? I'm convinced one of the greatest treasures you can store up for yourself in heaven is relationship, is a connection to other people. Because beyond everything else, those are going to endure into eternity. When we get to heaven, those are going to be the things that have lasted, that have made a difference, and that get people to see the face of God. We've got to focus on that. It's such a fundamental part. I hope that I've been able to inform a little bit about what an assistant does, why I feel very passionately about it, and I hope that I've encouraged all of you who may not be assistants to go out and make an intentional human connection, to invest in somebody, to mentor somebody. It's needed, it's wanted, and it is so necessary in our world today. Thank you very much.